You know, this Path of Exile 2 hype is completely and totally out of control, and I'm here to tell you it's absolutely justified, 100%. Here's some of the reasons why. Reason number one that everyone's hyped out of their mind for PoE 2, the developer and their prior game. Simply put, the studio making this, Grinding Gear Games, are incredibly well liked and have built a ton of community goodwill over the years. Mainly because they are receptive to feedback, seem to actively play and actually understand their game, making positive changes based on that understanding, and they have been releasing regular updates for a full decade. They've built so much goodwill and people enjoy PoE so much that it's managed to do something practically unheard of in gaming. PoE has been one of an incredibly rare few games ever in history to see continuous growth over an extended period of time. And I mean quite literally, it has only been growing since it first released on Steam back in 2014, reaching its highest ever peak concurrent player count of over 229,000 simultaneous players just this past summer a few months ago, after over a full decade later of releasing. That is insane, and again, practically unheard of in gaming. Most games are nothing like that. As you're probably well aware, most games will see their peak concurrent player count at launch and then slowly dwindle, losing 70, 80, 90% over the subsequent weeks and months, and then maybe they get a little bump later down the road. It is but a rare few lightning in a bottle type games that see continuous growth over time. So the fact that PoE 2 has just been getting more and more popular after over 10 years, I mean, that is a testament to what people think about the game, so the quality of the game, and in turn, the developer, the people who are making it. And on top of that, they are operating what many consider to be one of the most fair free-to-play business models on the market. Now, beyond selling cosmetics, they do sell convenience features, mainly in the form of stash tabs, i.e. storage space for items, but really that's about all you have to truly worry about. And if you are a more casual player, you don't even really have to bother with that. Like, you could totally get by without it. Now, if you're playing consistently and you're accumulating a lot of items, sure, you're probably going to want to buy storage space, but they are avoiding anything that is even remotely resembling pay to win, really just focusing on cosmetics and the stash tabs for sale. It's a great business model, and that is also attributed to part of the reason that they have had such great success over these past 10 years. I mean, I really can't say again how insane it is to still be growing and reach your peak concurrent player count 10 years after launching a game. It's so crazy to me that they're even making a sequel, given how continuously successful Path of Exile has been to this point. Really, it almost blows my mind that they're even bothering moving on to another game when they have a game that's still continuously growing year after year. But I digress. The number two reason people are losing their mind over PoE 2 is that simply it just looks fantastic. And I'm talking like surface level here, just the visuals of the game, very appealing. It's a marked improvement over the original title, looks very good in action and videos. I dare say, in a lot of ways, much of this looks better than Diablo 4. That is a company with a much bigger budget, with a much larger team working on their games, and yet somehow GGG has managed to pull out something that, again, in a lot of ways, almost looks superior already in the previews that we've been seeing and that I've watched so far. Just some really, really cool looking environments, really cool spells and animations and abilities, large number of enemies on the screen, huge effects popping off, cool environments. It just shows very well. It's just a good looking game, to the point where every time I watch like a class gameplay segment, I come away thinking, yeah, that's the one I'm gonna play. But I still have no clue which one I'm going to play because they all look so cool and they all make me say that. Not sure which of the 6 starting classes that are coming into early access launch I'm going to pick. And then there are further choices with the 2 ascendancies, eventually 3 ascendancies for each of those classes. Eventually there's going to be double everything. There's going to be 12 base classes with 3 ascendancies each, which result in 36 ascendancies, which is basically like 36 different playable classes fundamentally. That's a lot to check out, right? That's a lot to want to play. Now for the early access launch, the choices we got here, and this is what I'm struggling between. There's the warrior, the big tanky melee brawler with shields, charges, shouts, and totems. You got the sorcerer, who's like the elemental caster, you know, fire, lightning, frost, fireballs, frost areas, electricity bouncing all over the place. You got ball lightning. The witch is all about curses and minions. You can summon various undead enemies, even capture and control elites that you come across. You got the ranger, which is the agile ranged bow class, can shoot while moving, lay down traps and different elemental arrows. The monk is is fast and nimble, but as a melee fighter with a lot of martial arts inspired abilities. And then the sixth class that we're going to have at early access launch is basically the FPS guy. It is the mercenary. Uses crossbows with different ammo types that essentially have him functioning as like having different guns, shotguns, snipers, assault rifles, and launchers. And again, all of these have 2 ascendancies per class. Eventually it's going to be 3 as they go through early access. And the early access is supposed to be a pretty quick turnaround. They're targeting 6 to 12 months. So yeah, a lot of content already there. Speaking of which, that brings me to my third point and as what to why people are so excited. This game's just going to have loads of content straight out the gate. So at the full release, what they're planning is 6 acts to play through with the campaign. And then within each of those acts are a bunch of different segmented off areas with a boss in every one of those, resulting in over 100 unique bosses in the game, each with their own mechanics and attack patterns. They also emphasize the fact that these bosses will not just be upscaled versions of regular, normal, and elite enemies, but they will be entirely unique in the way that they look, the way that they act, and the way you have to engage with them. Now, with the early access launch that's happening this week, they're basically cutting that in half. They're launching with 3 campaign acts and like the 6 out of the 12 classes, but even within this framework, it's a load of content. And the reason why they've decided to truncate the campaign is because they wanted to focus on the end game. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, it's an extremely good sign because this really is what they should be focused on, because this is a bulk of the replayability. So even though they're launching with a 3 campaign act in early access, according to early reviews, that is ringing up somewhere in the vicinity of 30 to 40 hours. And that is all just the campaign prior to reaching endgame, which is where most of the content and playtime is going to be found for any players who stick around beyond just a campaign playthrough. For PoE2 in particular, what they've done is they've taken some of the most popular and well-liked endgame systems that they had in the original Path of Exile, and they have improved them. Here is what we know will be coming with this December 6th release. We're going to have this atlas, and this is basically everything that the endgame is encapsulated within. It is this large, never-ending map that continues onward and onward with these chains of interconnected nodes that lead to the maps that you're going in. You're doing your mapping, you're clearing these areas, killing enemies, collecting loot, and then also those nodes contain a variety of the endgame activities, which include bossing, where you fight a challenging boss. These are said to be harder than what we saw in PoE 1, with 50 at early access and 100 coming with 1.0. There's the expedition, where you uncover artifacts at these burial sites by blowing them up, and in that process calling forth enemies that you'll have to clear. There's ritual, where you interact with an altar, summoning and killing monsters. These will get progressively harder as you activate more altars moving throughout, summoning all of the prior monsters plus new ones on top of that, just getting harder and harder the more rituals the more altars you interact with. There's delirium, where this mist is created within a region. You have to fight monsters within that mist, and then killing monsters will increase your rewards, but also make future enemies progressively harder. There is breach, where you activate this expanding ring that reveals another dimension. You have to kill enemies that are revealed as quickly as possible. And then there are the trials. These are challenges that you need to complete in order to unlock and fill your class ascendancies. And then there's going to be endgame variations of these that ramp up the difficulty. On top of that, you got the Atlas tree, which as you engage in these different endgame activities, you reward points that you can spend in the tree. And this lets you bump the challenge of your preferred endgame activities for increased rewards. Each of the aforementioned endgame activities will have some very difficult pinnacle challenge that you can work your way towards, along with progression rewards for making your character more powerful as you go. And then the game also has a pinnacle boss that requires you to kill 3 uber bosses, collecting the keys that then grant you access to this fortress. And then the final pinnacle boss will be found within that fortress, although we've not seen much more details or information about that. This is apparently going to be one of the hardest things you can possibly do. The number 4 reason people are so excited for this game is that they're really leaning into their strengths. They're taking everything that people loved about the original PoE and just making it all better. So the game has a ton of depth to it. As you've probably heard, PoE is a very systems and feature-rich game that is extending into PoE 2. The passive skill tree is as big as ever, with over 1,500 nodes for you to move through. There are going to be 240 active skills, along with 200 support gems that will modify those active abilities. There's more class combinations than ever before, with 36 ascendancies at the full release. It's got that grim, dark tone and setting. I mean, even just like starting from character creation, you're picking from one of 6 classes that are all lined up, ready to be dropped at the gallows. Like that, they set the tone right at the gate there, you know what I mean? They've improved the combat, making it better feeling than it was in the original game. And then just the difficulty, right? This game is said to be harder straight away than PoE 1 was. you should expect a real challenge even just in the leveling up process. For example, things like bosses' health will reset if you die, unlike in PoE 1. And then come the end game, while you're mapping, death while going in a map actually closes it off to you, forcing you to find different nodes and find an alternate way around as you're working towards whatever your goals and target objective areas are. Now, even though they are leaning into their strengths of a complex systems and feature-rich game and a difficult game, at the same time, they're also making it more new player friendly, which brings me to point number 5. They've really worked on streamlining things and making the onboarding process for new players far more digestible. So for some examples, although the passive skill tree is completely massive and can look daunting, it has actually been really streamlined. So they've removed things like the life nodes, and now all damage related nodes are going to be a lot more generally useful. You might not always end up picking the most optimal build, but you should be far less likely to brick your character, even if you go in a quote bad node direction. Gems are also a whole lot simpler to figure out, rather than having gems of specific skills dropping or being sold from vendors or rewarded from quests. You just now find what are called uncut gems, and then those uncut gems let you pick whatever skill it is that you want to unlock from the various skill trees. Links were also moved off of gear into the gems themselves. So skill gems are essentially like active abilities. You find those uncut gems, you turn them into the skill that you want to use. There you go. You now have a new active skill. In PoE 1, those would be slotted into your gear, into these colored nodes, and you'd have to match the gem with the colored node, and then there would be links to other colored nodes that you would place supporting gems in to modify the main skill gem. Well, now it's not tied to gear at all, removing a situation where you might find a great, say, weapon upgrade, but it had bad links, or it would brick some skill gem setup that you priorly had because you needed a certain color skill gem and then certain color supporting gems, and if it didn't have that combination, you'd have to re-roll everything. And so they're just, again, everything's more streamlined in that sense and less convoluted for you to try to figure out. They've now included a recommended builds function via support gems that will be available directly in-game for newer players, helping simplify the process and not overwhelm you, at least when you're getting started making a build. Crafting has been simplified as well. You can now do it far more frequently. You can craft on the go. Bricking is a lot less likely as well. There's just a lot more options for working on an item. They've even done things like reduce the number of flasks from 5 in PoE 1 down to 2. You just have a health and a mana flask for restoring health and your primary spending resource. All of the utility-based flasks that used to be in the original game, those have been moved into this new charm item system. So things like increased move speed or crowd control breaks, that is now an entirely separate system, and the flasks are all about just replenishing your health and your resources. And also just the fact that this game has like a co-op focus, right? So they've got 6-person co-op that you can engage with. That's great for new casual players. You want to play with your mates, you want to play with your brother, you want to play with whoever, right? You can play with people. And this also comes with a lot of interesting things like co-op synergies. Like you've got the monk who lays down a bell, and then hitting that with any elemental attacks will cause it to pulsate that type of damage. That's kind of cool. Or the firewall, where if you shoot projectiles through it, it alters a projectile. So it'll add like fire damage. If you shoot lightning, it'll add fire damage and split the lightning into multiple projectiles, and all sorts of different potential combinations and synergies that are really interesting. And then they also just have couch co-op, which I think is a great addition. I'm probably personally not going to ever use it, but it's great to see. And yeah, it's good. It's good to see, right? Number 6 here is they've just made general improvements and additions from the original game here in PoE 2 that have just generally speaking all really good. So they've done lots of work to make combat better. It's just improved across the board, better animations, better sound, reduced input latency. They've added way more mobility to the game. So for example, nearly every melee skill and many range skills now have some built-in mobility to it. You've got the attack direction that can be adjusted post activating a skill, letting you track moving targets with abilities that have long animations or multiple phases and multiple sections of the attack to them. They've added a base level dodge roll as well for every character with no cooldown or charges. You are not technically invulnerable. AoEs in particular will still be able to hit you if you are within their range, but you can roll to avoid projectiles or certain melee strikes with this dodge. And then dodging also lets you animation cancel most of the skills in the game, which adds potentially more skillful play into the mix beyond just the casual players. If you're getting an animation canceling to really maximize the damage output, again, a lot of potential here while also avoiding damage at the same time. And then with all of this extra movement, it does things like open up a lot more options for them to design encounters with the fact that you have movement guaranteed baked into every character. And they have said that combat is a bit more slow, and we've seen kind of a slower pacing of combat in a lot of the gameplay we've watched. I don't necessarily know that means that come endgame, when people are min-maxing their builds and they've got everything fully loaded and their skill trees and everything's going, firing on all cylinders, it's probably still going to be crazy high speeds, screen clearing. That's part of what people like about these games. I think if nothing else, mixing and matching and having a variety of content where there's some like completely screen clearing builds that you want to do and some slower pacing for like the bossing, for example, where it's not as crazy and it still requires positioning and paying attention to telegraphed attacks and not just like moving at full speed, one-shotting everything as you go, right? And then one thing that's really cool to see is they've added like active blocking. I am probably going to play the warrior class, probably going to play that melee brawler, and they can active block with their shield. So rather than blocking just being like a passive defensive thing that just happens at a % chance roll when you get struck with damage, it's actually like you have to manually raise your shield to block damage. And I think that's cool. It's really neat. I'm actually looking forward to playing the melee class to try out the active blocking for no other reason. Bunch of new features and mechanics as well. So all CC abilities now will let you build up to a freeze or stun of bosses. Previously, a lot of bosses were like immune to any freezes or stuns, making having that as part of your build not effective during those encounters. Well, now these abilities will be useful in all encounters to at least some degree. They've also got the new dedicated resource of Spirit. This is going to be used for ongoing effects like Arctic armors, auras, and having minions. In PoE 1, these sort of abilities would drain your max mana pool, effectively reducing the amount of mana you had to cast other spells, so that players running around with ongoing effects or having minions would just have way less mana to use for active abilities. Now, obviously, the game was still designed around that, and you can make it work, but now they've just got an entirely separate resource for you to play with as well, in addition to your mana pool. They've now got auto weapon swapping, so you can set up which weapons are used for individual skills. So for example, if you have a weapon that increases fire damage, you can make it so that whenever you cast Fireball, you're automatically swapping to that weapon. This is a really good change. In theory, I like the idea of weapon swapping, bouncing between two weapons, but also it can feel very clunky at times. So having it just be automated and you're swapping between your two different weapon sets. On top of that, you're also going to have separate skill trees for these different sets. So you can have, say, a one-handed and when you're using a shield in a one hand, you can have a skill that's set up to being, you can have a skill template that's set up for you being more tanky. And when you switch to your two-handed weapon, all of a sudden you could swap to a variation of your skill tree that's all about doing like single target damage, for example. There's a whole lot of potential that you could set up here with this. They're also adding way more skill modification and utilities via the support gems to the game, moving away from focus just on damage multipliers. So we're talking about things like multi-shot, like increasing attack speed, increasing move speed, buffing your debuffs, or having better proc chance. And one seemingly small, but I'm going to say is actually rather massive addition to the game is that they have WASD movement included. This is really big. I know it's highly requested by a lot of people. I think like a lot of old school fans of ARPGs, the tried and true veterans of the genre, will scoff at the idea of WASD movement because click to move is how it's always been done for the most part for the most popular games in this genre. But honestly, WASD movement opens up a lot more potential for control. The fact that you can be moving in one direction and attacking in the opposite direction instead of clicking back and forth, like you click on the ground to move your character and then click on the opposite side to attack the thing and then back and forth and back and forth. If you can manually control your character and then simultaneously have your mouse or whatever, if you're playing with a gamepad, pointing in different directions while moving in the opposite directions, that's going to be way better for certain playstyles and for certain builds. In particular, the mercenary gonna feel like playing a twin stick shooter, honestly, and that that's really cool. I might actually try it. Probably not. I might actually try it. We'll have to see. I'll probably at least give it a go, at least for an afternoon, to see how it feels, right? But I'm probably too stuck in my ways with mouse and keyboard that I'll probably keep it. But I definitely see the value and the potential of WASD movement in a game like this, without question. And then probably the most obvious and the final reason everyone's so hyped over this past week in particular for Path of Exile 2 is that we had that early leaked review from Fextra Life, and as much drama surrounded that for all the reasons we talked about in the last video, the ultimate takeaway from me, and I hope a lot of people, was that the review was like super positive. Like it was like all great things. They were singing the praises of PoE 2. And I imagine that most of the rest of the reviews that we're going to be getting on launch day are going to be similarly echoing those same sentiments, because from everything that I've seen and for all of the reasons that we just went over and many others not even covered in this video, there's a lot of hype for Path of Exile 2. And in many cases, I would say it's a bit much, right? But I think this is one of the rare instances where it is entirely justified. PoE is a fantastic game, and PoE 2 is looking to be all of that and more and better. Really good sign of things to come, and I think we're on the eve of witnessing like one of the best games potentially over this past decade launching. That's a really I'm setting the bar really high, but I'm telling you, I think it's very, very likely. Like this could be the best ARPG of all time. I throw it out there almost as a joke in the past, but sincerely, I think that might be what we're about to be presented with here, and I cannot wait, honestly. So early access, we got to admit the fact that the launch your first few days, the servers are probably going to be on fire, so don't expect too much in these coming days here. Currently, in fact, it is the #1 top seller on Steam, and I think there's a real decent chance they break 1 million concurrent players. I think it's actually a possibility. There's so much hype and justified hype for this game that I think they're going to be seeing a lot of people jump in. Now, they are planning a relatively short amount of time in early access. They are saying that they are intending to reach the 1.0 full release of this game somewhere between 6 to 12 months, but no longer than 12 months. So we should be seeing the final version of this game by December 6, 2025. That is at least their planned tentative timeline. And as we mentioned, Grinding Gear Games has a lot of community goodwill. They have earned it. They deserve it. That is what resulted in their last game, Path of Exile, breaking into one of those rarefied spheres of gaming, of a game that continues to see growth 10 years after release. And if they can even replicate a fraction of that in PoE 2, yeah, I mean, great stuff. Can't wait. So yeah, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Hopefully that helps explain, if you didn't already know, why there's so much hype for PoE 2 and why it deserves it. That's it. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time. Take it easy.